Hello friends, a very warm welcome to Scholar. This is Akshaya and I take your medieval history course here. In this course we have so far covered 8 lessons and today is the 9th lesson, wherein we are going to talk about a very interesting period which is called as the Age of Conflict popularly by the historians, and this is the time between around 1000 AD to 1200 AD. And why is it called as such, and what were the important happenings and the events of the India of that time. This is essentially we are going to talk about in this lesson, and we will also talk about some important kingdoms which were coming up in the country at that time. But before we talk about all of this, which is the agenda of the discussion today, we will take a quick recap of what we have covered so far. The medieval history, as we discussed, the entire medieval history, we are doing it in some 3 phases, out of which we are currently in the phase 1, which we are calling as the early medieval period, essentially the early medieval period. And early medieval period, we are terming this as the time between 600 to 1200 AD. Usually they start at around 750, but we had started at 600 to give you a little background also as to the medieval ages. So phase 1 we discussed 600 to 750, and we took a background of how was the India in those times, and then we are currently in the phase 2, which is 750 to 1200. Now further we broke into the 2 phases for the North India. And for the South India, around this time we had one major dynasty, which was the Cholas, which was essentially ruling. And for the North India, for the 750 to 1000 period, we had done these 3 empires who were in this constant struggle, which we call sometimes as the tripartite struggle. Now, having done all that, we said that we are going to start with the time frame between 1000 to 1200 AD, and that is essentially what we are going to be discussing today. So let's start now. So the age of conflict, as I said, this is the time between 1000 to 1200 AD. This is called as the age of conflict because there was essentially a lot of tussles which were going on between so many powers, as you can see in this map, that were there, and there was a constant struggle. Everybody was fighting for their place, and there were a lot of changes which were happening not just in India but also in the Middle East or the West Asia, as that region is called sometime. And there was a constant struggle amongst all of these empires amongst themselves in order to claim the right place for themselves and in order to have a greater and a bigger and a stronger empire. Now, as all this was going on, there was also a breakdown that happened. So essentially the tripartite powers, which were these tripartite powers, they were your Palas in the east, then the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan, and the Pratiharas or the Gurjara Pratiharas in the northwest region, essentially. So there was a breakdown of these powers into many smaller kingdoms, and essentially in the North India, which was ruled by the Pratiharas, basically there was a disintegration of this big empire into many Rajput states. So the feudatories of the Pratiharas, essentially they broke down into many smaller states, and these were the Rajput states. That's how they called themselves. And some of these names, we are going to discuss all of them one by one, but some for now you can understand as the Chauhans, the Chandelas, and the Paramaras, Solankis, etc. So this is what was essentially the the picture, a political picture of those times. The most important role that the Rajput kingdoms they played in the history of the India was that they resisted the Turkish attacks. From this side we had this Ghaznavid empire, so they were constantly trying to get into India. So they were there were Arabs in Sindh and Multan, so they were further trying to get in. So these kingdoms, they essentially made sure that their entry wasn't that easy, and they resisted the Turkish attacks from northwest India for quite some time, but ultimately they were defeated, and of course the Islamic invasions happened and they went quite far until Deccan and far south in the country. But this is what essentially in short was the age of conflict. This map you can see I've put in the India from 1000 AD approximately. These were the major kingdoms which were ruling in the different parts of the country. So you can see that there was Kashmir, then it was ruled by basically the Indo-Shahi or the Hindu-Shahi dynasty. Then there was Chauhans, then there was the Gurjar Pratiharas confined to a very smaller region, then the Palas. This is essentially around 1000 AD. After that, between 1000 to 1200, they were further, Palas were gone altogether. It was replaced by Senas, etc. But this is when it all began, the 1000 AD. So just to give you a sense of where it began, you can see this is how India looked when the age of conflict essentially began. Now, as I said, the Pratiharas broke down into many smaller Rajput kingdoms. Which were these kingdoms is what we are going to essentially study in this lesson today. Starting with the quick introduction about the Rajputs overall. So, the Rajputs, essentially this term, it came into prominence, and around 11th 12th century this came into prominence, because this is when all these dynasties essentially started coming up. And there were certain lineage based clans that were being termed as the Rajputs. Now they have different theories of their origin. For instance, some historians claim them to be the descendants of foreign invaders, because there were Shakas, Kushanas and Hunans, and they say probably it was the descendants of these invaders. Or also some people say that it was essentially the Kshatriya Varna of the Brahmanical system. So the Kshatriyas really took up this whole Rajput title, and they because they were essentially, Rajputs were essentially the ruling class. So there are different theories of their origin. And Rajputs associated a great deal of importance to the land, the family and honor, etc. The Rajputana, An, Ban and Shan. So usually it is associated to a lot of honor, etc. I mean, they have these strong associations and emotions towards these things: Rajputana, land, family, honor of the family, etc. Now usually you see there are three different kinds of lineages that Rajputs claim their origins to. So they either call themselves as the descendants of Lord Rama, which is essentially the Suryavanshis as they call themselves, and their main deity is sun god, or they claim themselves as the descendants of Lord Krishna, and their chief deity is the moon god. Or the third interesting story is of the Agnikula, or the Agnivanshis as they sometimes call themselves, Agnikula or Chandravanshi or Suryavanshi. And the Agnikulas, basically they say that sage Vashishta, from there was a Havan which was going on, and from that fire of the sacrificial fire of sage Vashishta's Havan on the Mount Abu, these Rajputs were born. And so these are the different theories that Rajputs claim about their origin. And these theories, because they are associating themselves to such great personalities of the past, be it Rama, Krishna or sage Vashishta, so it kind of validates their dignified position of a warrior class in the society. So these are the different stories that they sometimes claim. This is about the whole dynasty or the whole Rajputs class in general. But which were the key clans that we are going to talk about today? So we will discuss the Chauhans or the Chahamanas of Ajmer. Then we will discuss the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. We will also talk about the Paramaras of Malwa. We'll talk about the Chalukyas or the Solanki Rajputs of the Gujarat. It is not Chalukya, it is Chalukyas of Gujarat. And then the Tomaras and the Gahadavalas of Kannauj. So these are essentially the kingdoms that we are going to talk about today, one by one. Starting with the Chauhans of Ajmer. Now Chauhans, we have all heard of the name of the great Prithviraj Chauhan. I'm sure all of us have heard of and read of his stories and heard of his stories, etc. This is essentially the same Chauhans, and these are the Chauhans of Ajmer. They are also sometimes, as I said, are called as the Chahamanas of Shakambari or Sambar. Shakambari is essentially the place which is currently in your Sambar Lake, which is a Ramsar site you'll study in your environment. Shakambari Lake is essentially, which is currently that Sambar Lake region of Rajasthan. So these were from that region, but later they shifted their capital to Ajmer, so they are called as the Chauhans of Ajmer. Now originally they were the feudatories of Pratiharas, as I said, after the breakdown of the tripartite power in the north, after the breakdown of the Pratiharas, all of these Rajput kingdoms had emerged. And it was during the King Simha Raja that they claimed independence. Who was, so this is one important king, Simha Raja, who was their founder. Secondly, Ajay Raja, who had founded the city of Ajay Meru. Ajay Meru is essentially Ajmer. So Ajay Meru was founded by Ajay Raja after his name, and the Adai Din Ka Chopra, which was essentially the structure which was converted into the Adai Din Ka Chopra. We'll see in Delhi Sultanate what is this Adai Din Ka Chopra mosque. It's a famous mosque. This was constructed by them. This structure, it was essentially a Hindu structure, later converted into Adai Din Ka Chopra mosque. So this is another thing which we'll study in the Delhi Sultanate, this whole conversion of temples to mosques, etc. And like I said at the start, the most famous Chauhan is Prithviraj Chauhan or Rai Pithora. Rai Pithora is usually how in the folk legends Prithviraj Chauhan is referred to as, right? A quick look at where the territory was, how this is essentially where the kingdom was. This is your Shakambari or Sambar, and this is Ajmer, right? So this is essentially the area under Chauhans. Now talking particularly about Prithviraj Chauhan, because this is the most famous Chauhan ruler that we have. He took the throne at the age of 11. It was at a very young age he took over the throne, and he's most noted for the defeat that he meted out to Muhammad Ghori in the first battle of Tarain in 1191. These dates, usually dates are not so important, but something like a battle of Tarain, you might want to remember this day. It gives a good impression, you know. Generally they wouldn't ask a particular year in the prelims, etc., but just to give you a sense of the timeline. And the second battle of Tarain, the very next year, unfortunately in this battle Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated by Muhammad Ghori, and this is actually the most notable or the most landmark event in the Islamic conquest of India. This is essentially a foundation stone of the whole Islamic rule which was later established. Now there are two great poems, Prithviraj Raso and Prithviraj Vijaya. They were written by Chand Bardai and Jayanka. Prithviraj Raso, Chand Bardai, was written by Chand Bardai, and the other one, Prithviraj Vijaya, was written by Jayanka. Both of these they were his court poets, right? And they were written after Prithviraj Chauhan's life. So this is about Prithviraj Chauhan. And finally, in almost around 1301, Alauddin Khilji, he captured Ranthambore, and the Chauhans as a kingdom, they were essentially uprooted. So this was about the Chauhans. Now we talk about the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. Now I hope you know this region of Bundelkhand, you know, MP and central, I would say Uttar Pradesh region, etc. So that is your central UP and the north of MP. That region is essentially called as the Bundelkhand region. And the dynasty that was ruling around that area was called as the Chandelas. Chandelas were again initially the feudatories of Gujara as Pratiharas. As I said, that after the breakup of Pratiharas, all of these kingdoms had come up, and they also declared their independence after Pratiharas they declined. And who was the founder? Nanuka. Nanuka was the founder of this dynasty, and he established his capital at Kharjuravahaka or Khajurao. The ancient name of Kharjuravahaka, or the older name of Kharjuravahaka, is Khajurao. This is where he established his capital. Later the capital was shifted to Mahotsava Nagar or the Mahoba. This is in modern day MP, the city of Mahoba, and this is where the capital was shifted to later. And Chandelas are very known for their art and architecture, especially the Khajurao temples, you know, the famous Khajurao temples, Kandariya Mahadev, Lakshmana temple, Vishwanath. These temples you could remember. These are important from the art and culture perspective also. And this is the most notable, I would say, contribution of the Chandelas dynasty or the kingdom to the Indian history. And you can see here the beautiful Lakshmana temple, which is at Khajuraho. The Khajuraho temples were built by the Chandela kings, you should remember. Now they had also commissioned certain water bodies, etc. For instance, at Ajayagarh, the modern Ajayagarh, they had built some water bodies, and then at Kalinjar Fort again very famous, and then they are also built at their little capital, the Mahotsava Nagar. Now this dynasty declined because of the Ghaznavid and the Ghurid invasions, the Islamic invasions which were happening, and they were essentially, you know, pushing further inside India. So let's say if this is India and this is please excuse my map. So if they were somewhere here in the central region, and further the Islamic invasions were further coming more and more deep inside the country. So when they reached this region, the Chandelas were also uprooted. Also, they were at constant war with the Paramaras and the other neighboring dynasties. So this is how the Chandelas, they came to a decline. And around 1200 AD or CE, the Delhi Sultanate had finally invaded the kingdom, and they were extinguished, or the dynasty was no more, or it was disestablished. Now the third dynasty that we have here is the Paramaras of Malwa. The Paramaras of Malwa, they were from the Mount Abu area of Rajasthan. And the term Paramara, it means the slayer of the enemies, somebody who destroys their enemies. And they were again the feudatories, not of the Pratiharas but of the Rashtrakutas. So which were the three tripartite? Pratiharas, Palas and the Rashtrakutas. Paramaras were not the feudatories of Pratiharas but the feudatories of Rashtrakutas. Remember, we had done the Rashtrakutas also in our initial lessons. So Paramaras were the feudatories of Rashtrakutas, and they were ruling essentially at Malwa, the region of Malwa, and the capital was at Dhara, which is your modern city of Dhar the present day Dhar city of MP, but later it was moved to Mandapa Durga, or the current city of Mandu, right? And Paramara kings were essentially Shaivites. They were the followers of Shaivism, and they built several Shiva temples, and their most notable king was King Bhoj. Now there was a different Mihir Bhoj that we studied during the Pratiharas. I hope we all remember King Mihir Bhoj, and this is another king who's from the Paramara dynasty, and he's also the King Bhoj. Now King Bhoj, as important the Mihir Bhoj was for the Pratiharas dynasty, equally important is the King Bhoja, who had a reign of almost 40-45 years, and is the most celebrated ruler of the Paramara dynasty, right? And he had even defeated the Chalukyas of Lata. This is not. This is the third branch of Chalukyas. The Western Chalukyas, you remember the Western Chalukyas, Eastern Chalukyas, and then there was a branch of the Western Chalukyas who had gone on to rule from the Gujarat. This is that Chalukya, the Chalukyas of Gujarat, and they were defeated by King Bhoj, and he also gained control over northern Konkan. Now Konkan, you see, almost the western coast. So he had covered all of that region, and the extent of the kingdom was almost from Chittor, in Rajasthan in north, to Upper Konkan in the south, from Sabarmati in the west to Vidisha in the east. So you can see that the kingdom was quite extensive under King Bhoja. Now King Bhoja, he, to defeat the King Jayasimha too, if you remember from the Eastern Chalukyas of Venge times, to defeat that King Jayasimha, he formed an alliance with Rajendra Chola, who was again a mighty king, and Gangadhar. These names are not important, but just remember that he had defeated the Chalukyan king also, Jayasimha. However, towards the later periods of his reign, Jayasimha's son Someshwara, he had finally invaded Malwa and sacked its capital Dhara. Now titles you can remember, as I say, he was given the title of Parameshwara Param Bhattaraka. Parameshwara, something like comparing the mightiest of the mighty, and almost comparing him to God. King Bhoja was being compared to God in this title. And another thing that you can remember about King Bhoja was that when Ghazni, the Mahmud of Ghazni, if you know, when he had made those 17 famous invasions to India, at that time Bhoja had sent his troops to support the Hindu Shahi king Anand Pala in his fight against Ghazni. This is another important contribution of King Bhoja of Paramara dynasty. And also he is considered so great because of his contributions outside the military field, and he was a very righteous king. He was a polymath. Polymath is somebody who was a great learner, and he had a knowledge of so many subjects, and He had established a Bodhshala, which was basically a center for learning Sanskrit, and he also established a temple at Saraswati in the present day city of Dhar. And also he had founded the city of Bhojpur and built this Bhojeshwar temple and Bhojpur. This is an incomplete, it couldn't be completed, but he built this Bhojeshwar temple and founded the city of Bhojpur. Also sometimes there's a folklore, and the folklore says that he had also founded the city of Bhopal. They say that initially it was called as Bhojpal. In the 11th century, it was King Bhoja who had founded this city of Bhopal. So this was about the Paramaras, and finally the last known Paramara king, he was defeated by Khilji. So we will see in the Islamic conquest in the next lesson that after Ghazni, Gauri came, and after Gauri had gone back, his general Khilji came. So it was Khilji who finally defeated the last known Paramara king, and in 1305 AD, and finally in 1338. These dates are not important, but just remember, almost by the mid of the 14th century, even the Paramaras were annexed to the Delhi Sultanate, right? So now we shall discuss the Solanki Rajputs. So we have discussed Chandelas, we have discussed Chauhans, and we have discussed Paramaras so far. Now we're talking about the fourth kingdom or the dynasty, which is the Solanki Rajputs. Solanki Rajputs were basically the Chalukyas of Gujarat. At the start I said, right, the Chalukyas, but remember this is not Chalukya, right? And they do not claim any association to the Chalukyas of Kalyani, Vengi, Badami. It's not those Chalukyas, it is a different, they don't claim a descent to them, and this is why they use a different variant, which is Chalukya. And they were ruling in which parts? You can see here, this is where the Solanki's empire was, and they were ruling in the parts of Gujarat and Kathiawar. Kathiawar is this region, right? This lower Horns, this is Kathiawar, and they were ruling almost in what period? 10th century to 13th century, you could say, right? Now, as the Paramaras had the king Bhoja, similarly Solankis had the king Bhima. Now, Bhima's contribution again very important, most important, because it was during his reign that the Mahmud of Ghazni had overran Gujarat and he plundered the Somnath temple. I'm sure we all have heard of the invasion of and the plundering of the Somnath temple by Mahmud of Ghazni. So this was during the reign of this king, which is King Bhima I, and this was in which year? 1025 AD. It was his 16th invasion. He had made some 17th invasion. In the 16th invasion, which is in 1025 AD, he had overran Gujarat and plundered the temple of Somnath, and this temple was later then repaired by this king Bhima. Other contribution, he had built the famous Sun temple at Modhera. This temple is known to have the largest water tank, anywhere. So this is the Sun temple at Modhera that he had built, and his wife Udaymati, essentially under his reign, the famous Rani Ki Vav. You must have heard of it in your UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. The Rani Ki Vav, this was built by his queen in his reign, right? And he has even under his reign one of the Dilwara temples. Dilwara temples, where are the Dilwara temples? Mount Abu, the famous Jain temples. They were also, one of those Dilwara temples were also built under the reign of King Bhima, right? Now, this was about his cultural contribution. Why else is he so notable a figure in history? Because it was King Bhima who had repelled the incursions of Muhammad Gauri. Now, after Ghazni had gone back, he repaired Somnath temple. Now Ghazni had gone back, and Ghazni died in 1030 AD essentially, right? Now, after Ghazni, we will see how, but after Ghazni died in 1030 AD, then Gauri started coming, and Gauri came after Gauri invaded, further inside, and by the time he reached Gujarat, it was this king who essentially repelled Muhammad Gauri, and he was able to defeat Muhammad Gauri, which was a big I would say wake-up call for Muhammad Gauri, and then he went back also. So this is how important this king Bhima I of the Solankis were, right? And now we shall talk about and even same for the Solankis, just like the previous three Rajput dynasty, they were also ultimately made a part of the Delhi Sultanate, because later under Bhima II, after Bhima I, then Bhima II came, and then under Bhima II, essentially, Gauri's general Qutbuddin Aibak, he was able to annex this kingdom under Delhi Sultanate, right? Okay, so now we'll talk about the Tomars dynasty, and Tomars were essentially ruling from Haryana, and they had their capital at Dilika or Delhi. So this is the Tomar Empire, and they were also the feudatories of the Pratihara. Sometimes they are called as Tuas by the medieval literature, and they often were at war with the Chauhans of Ajmer. So we will see later that Prithviraj Chauhan actually annexes Delhi, and he annexes this area of the Tomars under the Chauhans, right? Chauhans and Tomars, they were at constant war. And why are the Tomars known? What is the speciality or the famous things that they did? They had constructed the earliest surviving waterworks in the Delhi area, right? For instance, your famous Suraj Kund Reservoir. There's a famous Suraj Kund Mela, which is which is organized every winters, and I think February somewhere this famous Suraj Kund Mela is organized by the Haryana government. So there's this famous Suraj Kund Reservoir. This was also built by the Tomars dynasty, and the general broad design of the Delhi city, this was also the whole plan was also laid out by the Tomars under the Tomars dynasty only. So this was about the Tomars, and now we've come to Gahadavalas or the Gadavalas, something like this. That's how it is written, the Gadavalas or the Gahadavalas, and they were ruling from which area? They were ruling from Kannauj, right? Or the Kanikubj. I had spoken of this in an earlier lesson. The Kanikubja is the older name for Kannauj, right? And this dynasty was founded by Chandradeva, and they ruled for almost around 100 years, and they claimed themselves to be Suryavanshi Rajputs, and they were the ones who had pushed the Palas out of Bihar, and they made Banaras their second capital, Banaras or Varanasi. Who was their last king? It was Jayachandra, or the last famous king of the Gahadavala dynasty was Jayachandra, and Jayachandra was essentially notable for his invitation that he extended to Muhammad Gauri, and it was who, along with Gauri, who had fought with Prithviraj Chauhan and defeated Chauhan, right? So it was during the reign of Jayachandra that Chauhan was defeated, and during his reign, these Chauhans, now why was this animosity against Prithviraj Chauhan? Because Chauhan had annexed Delhi. So Prithviraj Chauhan was trying to extend or expand his kingdom, and it was during Jayachandra that he annexed Delhi. So there was this fear that he's going to come further inside and try and annex Kannauj as well. Also, they say that Prithviraj and Jayachand's daughter Samyukta, they were in love, and Samyukta apparently eloped with Prithviraj, and there was this further dissension or dissent then, which was caused between the two kingdoms, and Jayachandra essentially sought help from the Muslims to invade the Chauhans, and finally in 1194 the Kannauj was actually attacked by Gauri, right? So then finally in 1194 Kannauj was attacked by Gauri, and then Kannauj was also annexed to the Islamic rule, and he was defeated in what was that famous battle in which Kannauj was sacked. It was the Battle of Chandavar, and his kingdom was also finally conquered under Muhammad Gauri, right? So he did seek Muslims' help for invading Chauhans of Ajmer, Delhi, and for defeating them, but finally his kingdom himself was attacked by Gauri, and it was added to their rule. So what have we learned today? Essentially, we have learned about the age of conflict. We took an introduction, and we tried to understand the the major happenings and events, and why was it called as the age of conflict. How did the three major tripartite powers they break down, and then we learned about the major Rajput kingdoms, and we also looked at their political history. So this is all that we're going to talk about today, And in the next lesson, we are going to talk about the social and cultural development during the Rajput dynasty. But for now, that's all we have, and thank you so much for watching. And for more such videos for your UPSC preparation, please log on to Skholar.com. Thank you.